jolly good book. It's called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And keep in mind, it's not a book, but even better, it's a play. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background of the play, okay? Are you ready? It was written by Tom Stoppard in 1966. Keep in mind, Tom Stoppard, his original name is Thomas Straussler. Anyway, he was born on July 3rd, 1937 in Czechoslovakia. He was born to a Jewish family, let's keep that in mind. In 1939, so 2 years old, little Tommy, he fled to Singapore to escape the Nazis. Jolly bad. Later, he went with his mom and younger brother to India to escape the Japanese who were invading at that time, during jolly bad World War II, whatever, this is not history class, we're doing English here. And then his father died. His father was a doctor, but he died. And then his mother married a jolly good man named Kenneth Stoppard. So then, jolly good Tommy, he adopted the Stoppard name. Thomas Stoppard embraced the whole culture, and then he ceased to speak Czech. They've just gone jolly bad because Britain is better, And then during his career, Tommy was a good old journalist, and then a theatre critic, and lastly, he was a playwright. Tommy becomes very famous. We really enjoy him. Nextly, I'm going to give you a little tidbit about this jolly good play, okay? It was written in 1966 by Tom Stoppard, as we've been over. It really embraced the Elizabethan era dramatic and comedic effect, it's quite funny, kind of Elizabethan.
First off, we have Rosencrantz, an easygoing, oblivious little guy who's a childhood friend of Hamlet. He goes on a search with his friend Guildenstern to uncover the reasoning why Hamlet has been acting very strange lately. Secondly, we have Guildenstern, who's a more anxious little fellow and who's a friend of Rosencrantz and Hamlet's as well. He goes on the search with Rosencrantz to see about Hamlet's peculiar behavior, and he seemed to be more uptight and realistic than our friend Rosencrantz. Nextly, we have Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark and a childhood friend of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. His strange behavior is followed by the death of his father and his uncle taking the throne and marrying his mother. Nextly, the Tragedians are a group of traveling male actors. And then we go into the player. The player is the leader of the traveling actors known as the Tragedians. He is witty and mysterious, letting on he knows more than what he reveals. Nextly, we have Claudius, Hamlet's uncle, who is evil. Then we have Gertrude, Hamlet's mother, who makes mistakes, but she still cares for the well-being of her son. Next, we have Polonius, the sketchy member of the Danish court and advisor to Claudius. Ophelia is the daughter of Polonius and Hamlet's ex-love. Laertes is the son of Polonius and the brother of Ophelia. He's pretty irrelevant, but you just wait till the end and then he comes into play. And now, on to the next.
Oh look, I don't need this. Jumping in to Act 1, the setting is in the wilderness, and Guildenstern and Rosencrantz are flipping coins. And they notice that every time the coin lands, it's on heads. And Guildenstern begins to speculate like maybe they're in an alternate universe where chance and time don't exist. Guildenstern asks Rosencrantz to describe his earliest memory, and Rosencrantz forgets it right away. And so they begin to get scared that they're in a different universe where things are different and they're not acting normal. Rosencrantz hears music, but eventually decides that it's not real, but it actually is because a group of people called Tragedians enter, and they are basically a group of actors who specialize in melodramatic performances. So they're a group of actors, and you'll find out that they take their job way too seriously, or at least one of them does. And that guy's name is the player. and he's the leader of the group. And you can tell that the other people around him don't really like him because he's kind of obnoxious and has a bad attitude. And the player introduces himself to Guildenstern and Rosencrantz and tells them that they perform anything for a small fee. And the tragedians get ready to leave because they have a performance at the court. But before they leave, the player instructs Alfred, which is a member of the group, to put on a skirt and perform. And Guildenstern gets angry at this and ultimately punches player in the face and tells Alfred to remove the skirt, and he calls the tragedians prostitutes. As the tragedians begin to leave again, Rosencrantz stops them and asks what they could do for 1 coin, which he tosses up in the air. A scuffle begins with all the tragedians. They're all fighting over the coin, and the player punches Alfred in the face. So now someone else punches another person, and Guildenstern and the player have a coin flipping bet to decide what's going on next. And we've already known that earlier in the book it kept landing on heads. So Guildenstern kind of had this advantage over the player where he'd know that it would land on heads. Okay, so it starts off where the player, he calls heads, it lands on heads obviously. Guildenstern calls heads, player calls heads again, it goes back and forth until the player finally calls tails, and Guildenstern knows it's going to be wrong. And so when Guildenstern's turns again and he calls heads, the player starts to get a little suspicious, and they begin to wonder if it's even a real coin or if they're telling them the truth on whether it's heads or tails or not. And this leads to a scuffle, and they decide to play a few other games before they decide that the player, until the player says that they have no money for them actually, so there's no point of having a bet. Fast forward to the next part of the scene, the lights go out. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are now inside with Hamlet and Ophelia. Hamlet explains that his father is dead, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern try to figure out what happened while also comforting Hamlet. After discussion, Guildenstern decides Hamlet has changed greatly, like he's more negative and he's not the same person that he normally is. And after asking questions, Guildenstern and Rosencrantz conclude they're kind of confused, like they don't really know what's going on and they're kind of scared at what Hamlet might do. That's the end of Act 1. Alright, Act 2. Hamlet claims to be mad only when the wind blows from a certain direction. Guildenstern begins to think that he knows why Hamlet's acting funny, but he doesn't really say. Rosencrantz, however, angrily states that they've made no progress and they're not even close to figuring out the way Hamlet is. Back and forth, they come with like a playful discussion about Hamlet, and Hamlet walks in and announces that the tragedians, who you saw earlier, they're going to have a performance in a play. And so there's this kind of awkward introduction between Rosencrantz and Guildenstern because they had an awkward encounter with them earlier. But then it's short-lived because they have a discussion about the play, and they also talk about Hamlet. So the tragedians know Hamlet from prior experiences. Hamlet and Ophelia burst back in tears, and Ophelia is stating that her wedding was canceled and that she's being urged to become a nun. When discussing acting, player then states that if a character is written to die in the play, that they must die for real. So you then begin to see how crazy player is and how serious he takes acting. So when someone is written in the play to die, he thinks that for the audience to get the full effect that they need to actually die in real life, which is very extreme. I don't need to say that, you know that's really extreme. Rosencrantz objects to the rehearsals, stopping it completely because he doesn't want anybody to die. Player states that the play features 8 deaths in all, and Guildenstern states that death is not something that can be acted, as 2 actors slowly die. So 2 actors from the group die as this whole exchange is going on, which is really suspicious because you don't see anybody murder them. It's just like they die. It's like they said like a keyword and they fell dead. So after the lights come on, Claudius comes back in and announces that Hamlet has actually killed Polonius. So Hamlet has gone off onto this crazy outburst, killing somebody else, and now they're trying to find him. So Guildenstern and Rosencrantz struggle with what to do, but decide to stick together because they don't want anything crazy to happen. After spotting Hamlet, they decide to trap him, but before they arrive, Hamlet hides the body of Polonius. They meet Hamlet, they have an awkward encounter. Hamlet kind of denies the whole thing, doesn't know where the body is. And then Claudius comes in, and during the whole exchange, Hamlet kind of finds his way out and escapes. But it didn't last very long because he's brought back in to the stage by 2 guards. So it's like Claudius had people waiting for him, and he was captured. Then they announced that Hamlet and Guildenstern and Rosencrantz are going to England to meet the king to handle the whole murder issue, and so they're being put on a boat, and that's how Act 2 ends. Act 3. Act 3 begins with the sounds of an ocean, so you know that Guildenstern, Rosencrantz, and as well as Hamlet are already on the boat on their way to England. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern discuss what to do before ultimately deciding on nothing. So you know that they're great decision makers. They discuss meeting the king and recall Claudius giving them a letter, but they don't open it, so you don't know what it says yet. That night, as Guildenstern and Rosencrantz fall asleep, you see Hamlet sneak in and steal the letter from them, from Guildenstern, and he replaces it with a fake one. So we don't know what the original one says, and we don't know what the fake one says, and how they might differ. But in the morning, when Guildenstern and Rosencrantz awake, they discover that the Tragedians have hidden on the ship, and due to Claudius's anger. And they discuss Hamlet's reaction, so they're not even fazed that these people have snuck onto the ship, which is kind of odd. But they discuss Hamlet's reaction and the murder and everything. And then, as if this play isn't crazy enough already, pirates charge the ship, and chaos ensues, cutting the lights. So the lights go off, and when the lights return, Guildenstern and Rosencrantz notice that Hamlet is missing. So Hamlet snuck out, and frustration kicks in, leading to a scuffle between Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, which is kind of odd because they're really close. It is short-lived, so that it doesn't last very long, but Guildenstern discovers that their letter has been switched. So he looked at the letter and noticed it was different, and as they read it, they find out that the letter calls for the death of Guildenstern and Rosencrantz. So Hamlet wrote the letter for the king, and it orders that Guildenstern and Rosencrantz die. So they need to find Hamlet and switch the letter. The Tragedians resurface while Guildenstern and Rosencrantz are still in disbelief that Hamlet would write this. Player makes a comment about how death is common, and Guildenstern, it kind of ticks him off, and he erupts in anger, stabbing Player with a knife, and the Tragedians, his group, the player that is in, they applaud. So you can tell that they're really fed up with the player, and they don't really like him as a person, but it gets better. The player stands back up and asks all of his friends, "Did you like my acting?" And Guildenstern, under further inspection, realizes that the knife is fake. So it was a whole stage. The player's not dead. And Rosencrantz is actually kind of amused by the whole thing. He applauds and asks for another performance. And the player, he certainly gets kind of mad, and he calls for a lot of death to everybody else. Rosencrantz discovers that the end is almost near and asks to stay on the ship. Guildenstern then begins to cry. He gets kind of emotional, and the lights go off. The lights resurface, and you see the dead bodies of Hamlet, Claudius, Gertrude, and Laertes. And the English ambassador is on the stage, and he makes an announcement that Guildenstern and Rosencrantz are dead due to the letter that Hamlet wrote. And that's how the play ends.
Hey y'all! After hearing that awesome plot summary from Jackson, let's talk about some themes. One theme is the incomprehensibility of the world. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern spend the majority of the play in total confusion. From the beginning of the play, they don't even know where they're headed. To the end of the play, they're confused by their own death. Who is confused by death? They simply cannot understand the world around them. Stoppard uses this theme for comic relief. The next theme is the difficulty of making meaningful decisions. In a state of constant confusion, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern can't ever make any significant life choices. Their passive approach to the world reflects how difficult it is to make any decisions in a world that we hardly understand. The main motif we see in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead is Shakespeare's Hamlet. Stoppard includes many of Hamlet's most important and notable scenes. By using Hamlet as a play that depicts real feelings and complex characters, Stoppard reminds us of the power of plays to speak to us on an individual and human level.
Jolly-o, well, I'd like to bid you a goodbye, and let me just say, I hope the next presentations are as interesting as ours.